can't talk all day.
We can't talk all day, Rebecca, but we have to talk for at least another hour while we're recording, which is right now.
Because we were cackling like old biddies.
We were, and we should continue that on the microphones. What do you say?
Here we go.
My name is Dr. Kirk Hanna. I'm a therapist and a professor, and this is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. Who are you, Rebecca?
My name is Rebecca.
Little Rebecca.
My name is Rebecca Bloom. I am 5'2". I specialize in complex post-traumatic stress. I work mostly with adults in South Seattle.
So let's talk about Sinead O'Connor.
Okay. So did you watch the documentary Nothing Compares?
I don't think so.
Okay. It's beautiful. It's on Amazon right now. And one of the things that was really interesting is that they talked about when she tore up that picture of the Pope, it ended her big time financial big arena career. Mm-hmm. And that she produced something like 11 albums after that. Mm-hmm. And very few people heard those albums. And so I wanted to read an abbreviated version of my favorite song.
Mm-hmm. Just to set the stage for those who weren't around at the time, Sinead O'Connor was an overnight world sensation. Not only a beautiful voice,
like not just a beautiful voice, but like souls, like reached into your soul. And
I'm getting chills thinking about the soulfulness and the power yet fragile power. You know, the real power that recognizes the reality of life, and you just got that from the way that she looked and sang and sounded and moved.
And we both sent each other our head shaved photos.
Yeah. And at the time in the early 90s, I'm thinking it was, or late 80s, for a beautiful woman to shave her head or cut her hair very short was unheard of. It
outrageous.
It was today it's completely just to some extent normal, but back then it was just bizarre. And I remember lots of people saying she would be so beautiful if she just grew out her hair. There's a lot of confusion about it. And so it was this perfect storm for her to rise to superpower. And then the height of her power, and she's selling out arenas. Her career is set for her. And she would have done amazing in the 90s. You know that she would have.
Oh, yeah.
And she goes on Saturday Night Live, right?
Yeah. And
she impromptu has this picture of the Pope.
Which I learned in the documentary was the photo that was hanging on her mother's wall.
Right. So, in the background of her mother.
Horribly abusive. Locks her out of the house. Horrible woman.
So her mom was extremely abusive and was also using a lot of Catholicism and a lot of justification, based on that. And also Sinead grew up with a lot of religious abuse growing up, right? And also, Sinead O'Connor knew the atrocities of the Catholic Church and was doing this symbolic act of ripping up this picture of the Pope as a way of saying something about all this stuff, right? And in today's world, you would get a lot of backlash, but you would get at least some support. There would be some decorum at least.
Well, and this is before she is the first person to publicly, for me, acknowledge the atrocities of the Catholic Church. This is before all of the abuse scandals. This is before anybody admits that popes serially rape children, right?
Yeah, like way before.
Yeah.
And it's still taboo, kind of, but back then it was crazy taboo. And everyone, even people who might have been on her side if they knew what was going on, everyone turned on her.
Madonna turned on her.
It was like she was this crazy person and she crossed a line. Mm-hmm. And all she did was rip up a picture. Mm-hmm. Just think about that.
Right.
Think about what those people have done to others. And then she just completely fell from grace overnight. I mean, everything turned around. Now, later in interviews, she would say, I don't give a shit. I didn't want to be famous. Right. I never saw myself as a darling of the tabloid or of the middle class. I never wanted that. So the fact that I fell from grace or, fell out of favor, like, fuck it, I don't care. I'm me, and that's just the way it's going to be. And, I lived through that, and I barely remember it, really.
Well, and I'm having a completely contrasting experience. I mean, the day that she died, it was like all of the women of my generation gathered together online to collectively mourn.
But when it happened back then, were you?
I was heavy into my own discussion of my own childhood sexual abuse at that time. And so it really fit into my narrative.
So do you remember people talking about the context? Because I don't remember anyone talking about, I just remember that people were saying she's crazy and she did this crazy thing.
Yeah. I mean,
which is an old misogynistic, trope.
I remember the backlash so intensely.
Yeah.
But it was that day that she died was so intense. I texted you. I texted a ton of people in my life. And it was like all of these women in my life were mourning that like we are seen as crazy to speak our truth. Right. And I know Sinead O'Connor was very public with her mental health issues and her search for meaning in her life and her search for connection. And about a year before she died, one of her children completed suicide.
Right.
And so, a lot of people are speculating that she couldn't sit with the pain of that.
Yeah, there's some evidence in her tweets or whatever that she was maybe contemplating. And I imagine, and maybe data on this, that she had been contemplating suicide for maybe her whole life based on her trauma. So it was like 94. So this is the song "Thank You for Hearing Me," and it was introduced to me by an ex-lover at the time that was trying to make me feel better for breaking up with me. So each line that I'm going to say in the song repeats 4 times. I'm just going to say it once, and I'm not going to sing it because, unlike you, Kirk, I have a horrible voice. So here are the lyrics to a song that that you might not have heard. And if there's one thing that I hope this podcast does, is that people go deeper into her library because she created great music throughout her whole life. And because she spoke out against the atrocities of the Catholic Church that now we all know are true, you didn't hear a ton of this music. This is how misogyny works. So here's the song. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for seeing me and for not leaving me. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for not hurting me. You are gentle with me. Thank you for silence with me. Thank you for holding me and saying I could be. Thank you for saying baby. Thank you for holding me. Thank you for helping me. Thank you. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for breaking my heart. Thank you for tearing me apart. Now I am a strong, strong heart. Thank you for breaking my heart. So the songwriter was John Charles Reynolds. But if you hear her version, as with many of her songs, they just get in there and rip your heart out. That was the first song that I listened to after I heard that she passed. Like, that song for me captures the depth of what she can do in music, which is hold these really, really complex parts of our experience. Yeah, I feel like that lyric is very her.
So if people have questions about her life that they'd like us to answer and like us to go deeper into, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, just put in the email to Rebecca or Rebecca Sode, or, well, those 2 words, really.
This is a Rebecca Sode.
So, all right, let's take a break. And we get back, let's read some emails. What do you say?
I'm down.
Okay, so we're back from the break. This is not an email. I lied earlier. This is a HuffPo article that people sent to us to talk about. So it's about Drew Barrymore.
Ooh.
It's an article by Elise Wanschel on HuffPo, titled Drew Barrymore's Therapist Responds to Her Account That He Quit Due to Her Drinking. So did you hear this story?
No.
That apparently she had a therapist who said, I can't treat you anymore because you're drinking. So I'm just going to read excerpts here.
Okay.
Drew Barrymore told the Los Angeles Times earlier this week, this would have been, months ago, that Michaels, known for treating Gwyneth Paltrow and for co-authoring the book The Tools with Phil Stutz, just chiming in here, I reacted to the documentary made by Jonah Hill, it was a whole documentary just about how awesome Phil Stutz was as a therapist for the stars in LA. And although I don't doubt that he's a great clinician and helping a lot of people, but some of the claims made by him and in the documentary were spurious at best. Most notably that he had invented an entire form of therapy that no one had ever come close to. And all I could see was so many people of his generation,
it's so narrative based. Like, and the New York Times did an article on him like 10 years ago. And
Phil Stutz?
Yeah.
Oh, you've heard of him before.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading the article because everybody's like, you got to watch this documentary. And I'm like, I read the article 10 years ago. I don't need to see the documentary.
He's straight down the middle, like humanistic, gestalt-y kind of therapist.
He sends his clients home with questions on cards. Like, this is straight up narrative therapy, everyone. Like, this stuff is really, really old.
Yeah. So it's fine, but don't
great.
Claim that you invented it.
Yeah.
That's so narcissistic and just out of touch. And any therapist who knows anything would say he didn't invent that. So, and also just, I don't know. So apparently this Michael's character is a Phil Stutz friend. So by association, I'm a little concerned. But anyway, so that Michaels previously stopped sessions with Drew Barrymore after a decade of working together. She explained that following her 2016 divorce with Will Kopelman, she began drinking again, and Michaels, the therapist, was concerned about her alcohol intake. The therapist is providing a bit more insight as to why he temporarily stopped working with her as a client. Just before we going on, what are your thoughts about a therapist that stops working with a client who is drinking?
I mean, this is actually quite common. A lot of therapists will say, if you're heavily using substances, I can't work with you until you've chilled out. I'm not trained in how to do that. Many therapists are only trained in abstinence models and not harm reduction models. So this is very common. I mean, I have said a flip. As someone once came to me for an intake, and they were like, by the way, I'm heavily drinking like every night. And I said, hey, just so you know, this work won't stick if you're heavily drinking. You'll have to come back later and do.
Why doesn't it stick?
Because your brain is in an altered state. You are numb. And this work is about not being numb. And this is why you don't drink in the therapy session, even though tons of people would like to. And
some do.
Yeah, we're trying to stay.
What about if someone smoked weed before a session? Because some people smoke weed all day. They take edibles.
Yeah. I mean, they are in that state, and if they get in that state, they'll have to do the work again. Mm-hmm. Because and the therapist and the client aren't on the same plane of existence. So I've had clients be like, "Can't I just smoke a bowl before I come in?" And I'm like, we won't be doing the work that I do. You will be high sitting with me. If that's what you need to do, I'd rather you not. In fact, please don't. I don't want to be high while I'm trying to do therapy. Mm-hmm. I don't want you to be high while I'm trying to do therapy with you.
Yeah. So, of course, drinking alcohol and numbing out through any substance is a problem in a variety of ways, let alone to therapy. But for me, I don't have a hard line around that. If I heard that someone was drinking every night heavily, of course we would have a conversation, but I'm much more flexible, hands off, I guess, and I just don't have that party line. I would contemplate, especially at the beginning of therapy, recommending that they go into treatment and then come into me later. But if midway through treatment I learn, for example, that this is what's happening, I would just integrate it into the conversation. It's probably a symptom of the very thing they're wanting to get healing from.
Right. And I'm curious if Michaels has worked with Drew Barrymore for a long time and can see a massive behavior change with her drinking. He may be setting his own limits about his practice, knowing the model that he does will not work if she's heavily drinking.
Right. It's also potentially a Al-Anon sort of intervention of I can't stand by and enable and placate your self-destruction by acting like everything is normal when everything is not normal. And you refuse to address this. And I'm worried about you. And I am altruistically saying to you, we can't do this while you're engaging in that self-destruction. It's too painful to me. And as your clinician, I'm being irresponsible by enabling this, by just acting like it's not happening. So
I had a client who told me about their reckless driving. And I was like, dude, if you're doing that, like, I can't work with you. Like, you're literally like running stoplights purposefully, like not viewing
suicidally.
There had been when there's a death in the family and people are like flirting with death.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a symptom of your grief.
Yeah.
You are not actively suicidal, but you are playing with the rules of society.
Right, it's almost worse because you're
endangering other people.
Yeah.
Like, if you're making this choice, it is too dangerous for me to work with you. And like, I am on the verge of reporting you to the cops if you continue to do this, because you're putting so many people in danger.
Yeah, I mean, this is straight up the Peterson case for our duty to protect in Washington State, the court precedent that was involved, as a very similar case was involved, and the clinician didn't take action because they didn't think it was Tarasoff. They didn't think it was reportable. They thought that confidentiality dictated they not reach out. But for us in Washington State, it seems as though those kinds of situations and all the other similar situations actually dictate that you and I actually do reasonably take reasonable action, even if it means breaking confidentiality.
So I just back to Michael's, is Drew Barrymore's drinking impacting her relationship with her children? Like, I mean,
it's hard to know. We don't know.
It's hard to know. We don't know. Although, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Go on.
A little bit about weed, and an asterisk about weed, because weed is potentially less intoxicating if you take it at sort of a maintenance level, and people will come into session or work all day having a moderate to mild dose of weed.
I know people that are high all day every day.
Yeah, and and for them, it might be pain management, it might be appetite management, it might be anxiety management.
Yeah, and also, we talk about the poor man's vacation, right? Like, not everybody has access to psych meds. Not everybody's found a psych med that works.
Yeah.
Weed is definitely an option. If somebody is blazingly high,
right,
it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's just hard. I've had clients who have come to session blazingly high, and it's annoying because I can tell they're altered and they're not exactly with me. But at the same time, I'm not going to kick someone out of therapy because they do that. I'm just going to be like, yeah, maybe next time don't smoke as much in the car in my parking lot. Like, maybe smoke less and maybe a couple hours before therapy. So, call it what you will. And I have a big history with this because I was fired from my very first internship after just like 6 weeks of supervision. And one of the paragraphs that was given to me by this supervisor, who I later learned I was his very first supervisee, and he said that he asked me and I remember this distinctly. He asked me, like, what would you do if you had a client that was drinking, had a problem with alcohol? What would you do? And I said, well, because I'd learned this, because what the fuck do I know? I'm 25, and I was told by a professor that the standard is to terminate, refer, and when they're sober, that you say, come back to me. And I said that, and then I said, but I've also heard that there's some flexibility there, but I don't know. My supervisor's asking me, and I'm 4 weeks into my internship, so I recognize I don't know anything. And I that's the way I answered it. But he said that I was being unethical by allowing the possibility for therapy to continue with someone in the throes of addiction.
So he fired you?
So yeah, I was fired from my internship.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And I thought, at the time when he gave me that letter, I thought, well, I guess I didn't know, because I didn't know. And so I gave my I didn't know answer, and then I get fired, and I don't know. And I'm thinking, I must be he's a supervisor. He knows. I don't know. He knows that I'm a bad therapist, so I must be a bad therapist. So I quit. And I went to Antioch, and someone, God, I can't remember his name. Do you remember the old dean of psychology, the psychology department? It's so Tony Collis.
That's pre-me.
Pre you. He was a very beautiful man who I just wandered through the halls of Antioch, and I went into his office, and he talked me down, and he said, just, it's not good, but it happens, and
we're going to make it through this.
And we'll make it through this. If it happens again, Kirk, then we have a problem.
So get it together.
But one time, that's a mulligan. Anyway, so going on with the article. The therapist is providing a bit more insight. Quote, occasionally a therapist has to suspend treatment until a patient is willing to stop certain chronic self-destructive behaviors that are impeding the therapy. Unquote. Michaels confirmed to the Times that he and Barrymore have since resumed their sessions because Barrymore decided to stop drinking.
Can I just say one thing? That there are certain types of clients, especially famous clients, that have so many yes people around them and so many buffers around them that their lives are different than, say, my client, who I am their primary support in the world. And I say, hey, if you're doing this, I can't see you. They self-reported that they changed their behavior. But from what I've heard from treating famous people is they've got, or really rich people, they've got more of a buffer around them, and their bad behavior can kind of last longer.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. All right. So let's take a break.
Okay.
And then the next one, definitely an email. What do you say?
I'm in.
All right, back from the break. So listener Holly from Ohio says, hi, Kirk and Rebecca. I thoroughly enjoyed your episode on Ultimatum Queer Love. I was wondering, do you think some of the villainizing of Vanessa, do you remember Vanessa?
Oh, yes. Who could ever, all of this is like burned into my memory.
Do you think that had to do with the fact that she is pansexual? As far as I'm aware, she's the only cast member who does not identify as a lesbian. As a bisexual person myself, I see a lot of bi-panphobia within both queer and heteronormative spaces. Bi-pan people are often painted as more promiscuous, dishonest, cheaters, attention seekers, and there's a notion that they can never be content with a given partner. I think that this is prejudice, along with Vanessa's sexual free attitude, could have been the factor that turned her into the target of Lexi and Yoli's bullying, which is ironic because if anyone on the show was being shady and unfaithful, it was definitely Yoli. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks. What do you think?
So first off, yesterday was National Bisexual Pride Day. And I have learned that the most marginalized, most impacted by prejudice group in the alphabet soup LGBTQIA community are bisexuals. And I'm old, so I use the word bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual interchangeably. I know for some people in those communities, those things are very different. But yeah, I mean, so Vanessa's rules around sexuality were different than some of the other members of queer love ultimatum.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you were later to look at Yoli's behavior, she was she was the most poly of the group in a way. She was open to the most lovers of the group.
Yeah, well, you tell me, because my impression, of course, bisexual people to the heteronormative culture, over, especially in the past, it was just lumped into, well, you're not hetero, so you're sinning, or you're disgusting, or you're a pedophile, or something. All those false associations. But you would think that gay people would be totally cool with bi people, but traditionally, my impression was, and of course, gay people aren't a monolith, but the things that I would hear and observe was that there was a prejudice that, oh, you're not admitting to yourself that you're gay, that you're...
Or you are taking advantage. I mean, so this is just to speak of the language that I have heard over the years. You are taking advantage of us. You will pop in, use us as lovers, and then pop out when you want
right.
the heteros. This is... Well, yeah. I guess it's true for gay men as well, but this idea that, like, there are so much more benefits for being in the, quote, straight world and being in a, quote, straight relationship.
Right, and you can imagine someone being hurt by that, right? That gay women fall in love, and person A, say Vanessa breaks up with Xander or something, and then Vanessa's next relationship is a man, gets married, has the white picket fence. You could imagine the Xanders of the world feeling like garbage and rejected, not only because of who they are, but also their sexuality. It's just like, yeah, you bopped into my world and ruined my life, and now you're going back to your privilege, and you get all the perks of being hetero, and you don't have to worry about it. And I'm left here not only with my grief and pain and loss, but also with the oppression. You can imagine perspective setting in. But when you consider that maybe that was just the course of their life, for the Vanessas of the world that are pansexual, it might not have been malicious or somehow disingenuous for them to have fallen in love with the Xander in this fictional story. You know what I mean? So those kind of prejudices, do they persist within? Oh,
yes. Yeah. I mean, I would say the biggest one is don't just bop into my world. Like, you can identify as bisexual, and that I'm speaking as a part of my community right now, not as my personal opinion. You can, if you're going to identify as bisexual, please be bisexual really openly, and not just like when you come and visit the queer community and then bop out to your straight life, right? Like, there is this idea that if you're going to really represent us, really be open about who you are. Because otherwise...
How would they do that? Would they tell straight people that they're bi?
Yeah. I mean, just be out about being bi, being out that you've had lovers of all kinds of genders, and you may be perceived as being straight. And I'm really speaking now of having been in the parenting world for, all those years that, women would like take me aside and tell me that they were bisexual. And I'm like, why are you telling me? Like, just tell everybody. I don't need to like, quote, like hold this secret for you. Like, just please be open with who you are. That would make my life a lot easier. The fact that you're going to like pull me aside and tell me that like, you've been with women, like that puts burden on me to hold this, quote, secret for you, as opposed to like, I can't hold a secret. Like, people may not perceive that I was in a lesbian relationship, but I am. Like,
I feel like I've heard that a lot. Does that happen a lot?
It happens a lot.
Yeah. Well, what's the motivation there, do you think? What's happening?
They are so excited to find an ally, not understanding that it's kind of a burden to only ask me to be an ally.
And you have to be a silent ally.
Right. I'm not allowed to be like, hey, she's bisexual. She's been with women too. Yeah. I'm not the only queer woman in this room. What a relief. Yeah. Right. That I have to be like, I'm still like the one out queer person, and everybody's going to come to me with their queer questions. Yeah. When it's like, I don't really want that job. I
mean, the bigger villain here is the heteronormative, oppressive culture that forces all y'all to somehow wrestle with whatever kind of safety and
Right.
space
When it's safe
you
to
could,
come out, who would you come out to?
yeah. Well, I feel like there's another, and I don't know this. I haven't heard this one very often, but the notion that if, for example, a gay woman were to, go on a couple dates with another woman that she thinks is lesbian, but then it's revealed that this other person is bi or pan, and that person says, yeah, I mean, my last long-term relationship was with a man.
I mean, I'm sure. So there is status. Do you know what a gold star lesbian is?
No.
Really? So a gold star lesbian is a lesbian that's never been with a man. So there is status in that. But a friend of mine told me that so she identifies as lesbian, and when she began dating after a divorce, she found the best partners for her were bisexual women who were poly. That those women fit what she needed the most. And I would say that was a real flip from the way I was brought up. But she was like, it's great. Like, they have a primary nesting partner. We have great sex. It totally works for me. They don't need me to be their one and only, because there's a problem in lesbian relationships. What does a lesbian bring on the second date?
A U-Haul?
Right, yeah. That, sometimes if you are looking for a primary lesbian nesting partner, like, things can get too intense too fast. So the idea that if somebody is pansexual and poly, that's great. Like, they're not going to come swooping into my life and like overwhelm me. So, I would say things have changed radically. The language that people use and the acceptance that people have, and that there's so many ways to date now. But I mean, that's why people use the word queer, right? Because you don't have to be specific of who all of your partners have been.
Yeah. And, being older, you and we remember the times when there was so much oppression and so much hostility and literal murder of queer people that there was a need to build a fence and say, no one can come in here unless you pass certain tests, because we have learned that we will die or be harmed or outed or fired from our jobs or kicked out of the military if we don't have some sort of hard line. And I could see that being misapplied to bi people who are legit allies or legit within the LGBTQIA community, but are seen as potentially suspicious. It's just easier maybe to say, well, unless you're all in, then we don't know what's going on with you. You could see how bi people would be really stuck in that middle zone, right? Yeah.
And some of the biggest, most powerful people who've changed the most, been the most out, changed queer society the most, been some of the bi women that I've had in my life. So, I think when you're young or new at this, it can feel very like, you're not all the way in. But like when I look at the longitudinal story of my life, like, thank God for the bi women in my life.
Were you kind of like that when you were younger?
When you come out, there is an identity process where you need to push everyone away. But pretty quickly, one of my dearest friends was bi, and there was, her and her male partner and us, me and my female partner, we spent tons of time together, and there was no judgment or, and then her next partner was a trans man. So, when you've been at this long enough, you've seen that like life takes a lot of, people's lives take a lot of paths. There's the great quote from Schitt's Creek where David says, it's not the label, it's the wine, right? Like, when you've lived a lot of life, you're like, I'm looking for good people. I don't care what you call yourself. I don't care where you spend your time. Can we be good people together? So yeah, I think things change over time, but I definitely, you see people in those militant phases all the time who are just like, I only want to be with X, right now it's trans for trans. And a lot of communities that I see, people are only looking to hang out with other trans people because that's where they feel safe. But it's like that identity is really new. And I see the same intensity of when I was coming out as a lesbian. And it was like, I only want to be with lesbians. Those are the only people who get it.
Yeah, which I totally get. And at the same time, it's unfortunate that some groups of also oppressed people get left behind. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, is the queer community overarchingly kind and welcoming?
Oh, I thought you were going to say yes. I thought the way that was heading, I thought you would say yes, of course. But there are some pockets.
Right. It can be pretty siloed, and like we are looking for people I am looking for someone exactly like me.
Oh.
And anyone outside
like still
of that.
to this
Oh,
day.
yeah. And then with the internet, it gets even worse, right? Because you can like super like, I want to talk to this skinny wedge of humans.
Yeah.
Only this skinny wedge of humans. Like, this is really interesting. I just did the 3-day intensive of the tarot and therapy. And so the last card that we talk about is the King of Swords, which is like the most positive male identity that's out there. And even in the 2 or 3 years that I've been doing that workshop, there is no positive male identity. Like I said to the group, who is your most positive, powerful male person? And like, no one said anything. And like a year ago, everybody was saying the president of the Ukraine. But it's like, the way our culture is working right now, no one can trust male identity. Like no one is like willing to say a name because like, will that person fall from grace tomorrow? Right? Like we're all very suspicious of
Well,
each
also
other.
it's kind of sticking your neck out a little bit because it's hard to know if someone is perfect, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's always, and also if you dig it down deep enough, all men have sexism in their bones because it was infused when they were developing. So I want to remind everyone that Rebecca's on, not remind, but announce that Rebecca is on Cameo.
I know it just happened.
Well, it happened a while ago, but it's been a while since it's been on the podcast.
I know. We had like this 3-month break. Something weird up. It was like the summer was a vortex.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I want to invite everyone to get cameos from Rebecca or send cameos. You can get your own cameo. People do that sometimes. They'll go,
if you want to talk to me, if you want me to pull a tarot card for you.
Ooh. Yeah.
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a really fun way to connect with folks.
Yeah. And I get a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment from Cameo myself, which I've talked about before. It's a little kind of treat every couple days or so. And I get to say happy birthday or hear about someone's accomplishments of graduation or overcoming cancer or something. You know, it's nice to be able to, it just feels good to be able to congratulate people and to just get to know people a little bit. And
people have asked me what my experience is like being an accidental podcaster on an internationally well-loved podcast. And I'm like, it's crazy magic. It's crazy magic to hear from listeners from all over the world, to get thoughts from people, to see images of people, to get fan art. We just got a bunch of fan art. Mm-hmm. I'm like, this is so crazy. If I could have told my high school self, like, just hang in there. There's a whole nice world out there. Mm-hmm. I couldn't have believed the world that you built with this podcast.
Yeah, what did you think about Soft Doodle's comic strip?
Oh my God, it was so sweet. I sent it to everyone. I got a lovely version. It's her, Soft Doodles is in the middle, and then it's my things that she thinks I would think are all around her. And they are things that I think, and I just thought this was like so great.
Yeah, it was like, fuck the patriarchy.
Make art, be queer. Oh, and then at the bottom, somebody wrote into her comments, you didn't mention anything about no turmeric. And so she wrote at the bottom,
oh, right,
no turmeric.
Yeah, that was great. I was like, oh, Soft Doodles listens to Rebecca Sodes. Like, that's a kind of a deep cut a little bit. Okay, one more email. Anonymous patron, she says, oh, sorry, 2 more emails. This is a short one. Anonymous patron, she says, any recommendations on books that explore attachment and eating disorders? There's such an array of literature out there. I'd welcome a tip on where to start. Many thanks.
I gotta look that one up. You talk for a while.
Well, I don't have an answer to this because my general answer is 99.9% of the times I do not have book recommendations because I'm terrible at that sort of thing. I wish I was better. So I just want to blanketly tell everyone the only books that I can possibly think to recommend are on the website. You go to psychologyseattle.com and just click around until you find the book recommendations. There's a pretty long list there, but there are a lot of academic books because that's really where I live. I don't live in the self-help world. So I'm guessing, though, that there are a lot of really great books out there is the thing.
So a lot of my clients love this intuitive eating model. And for my folks who have expressed the most success with overcoming disorganized eating, it's been discovering their own intuitive eating style.
Mm-hmm.
And I am just currently, I'm sitting here on my phone on Amazon, just scrolling through books and seeing what...
Well, yeah, to me, intuitive eating, I believe, well, I'll just tell how I perceive it myself, how I absorbed it was that it's listening to your body and it's valuing yourself and not listening to all of the fat phobia, not listening to all the diet culture, not listening to whatever oppressive messages you got from your parents, just slowing down and paying attention to what you need, which depending on what that means could go a lot of different ways. But to me, for myself, Kirk, it just pushes out all the nonsense, because for Americans, we tend to think about diet as something you need to like follow this guru or something, or this regimen or this plan or this diet or this restriction. And it's so much noise in one's head that you forget to listen to your body. So I got a quick question from annual upper tier patron Alexandra. She says, "Dear Dr. Kirk and Rebecca, thank you, Dr. Kirk, for asking Bob my question and answering it yourself too. I want to ask the same question to Rebecca. What is your therapist superpower?"
Oh, what is my therapist? I'm really funny.
Yeah? You laugh a lot in session?
I make other people laugh.
That's nice.
And I have heard and I'm really trauma informed. I'm learning that that's my superpower. I don't expect anything to happen. I don't expect my way to work. I'm willing to sit with people who are really lost.
Yeah, that's from my impression what I would say as well, that you're very good at normalizing and highlighting and creating a safe space for people to be themselves and to talk about their trauma, which sounds like, well, duh, shouldn't all... It's
not easy to do.
Yeah.
It's rare.
It's a vibe that you have.
Yeah.
And philosophy and an emphasis, the way you sigh, for example, it communicates something like, I'm with you, I know. And also it I'm guessing if someone came to you downplaying or minimizing their trauma, that your vibe would be perfect to help them to recognize that it's okay to express it.
Yeah, I just had a client who'd been in a lot of therapy the other day, and she came to me and we're getting to know each other, and she said, when I was having sex with my stepfather, and I said, you weren't having sex with your stepfather. You mean when your stepfather was sexually abusing you? Mm-hmm. And she was like, oh, right. I was like, yeah. So just so you know, I said this to her as a therapist, like in our work, I'm going to always correct that. Mm-hmm. And she was like, wow, no one's ever done that. I was like, yeah, well, I'm paying attention to how you speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a mindset. It's a recognition. It's a mode and a vibe that I'm sure is very, very helpful to people. Last question. Middle tier patron Fatima or Fatima. I've heard both.
Fatima.
I've had friends that pronounce it Fatima and Fatima. From Chicago, she says, What do you think of the trend of people self-diagnosing themselves with autism based on information they gather from TikTok?
TikTok.
More broadly, what do you think about the fact that people are pathologizing their behavior without the input of a professional? My impression is this can be deeply validating for some people, but because they lack the context and the frameworks of a trained professional, their assessments can be inaccurate and exaggerated. What do you think?
We're all as professionals just trying to catch up, that people have access to so much information. One of the things that really happened in the pandemic is so many more people identify as being on the spectrum now than before. If that's the only thing you have access to understand your behavior, I hope that TikTok really helps. There's always the difference between just being able to label yourself, and then if there's true, I don't want to say pathology, or true ways that your behavior really impacts your life, do you need to check in with someone else and learn some skills for that? So one of the things I really noticed for a while, it was really popular for women my age and a little bit younger to self-diagnose as having ADHD. And then one of the things that would happen was they would say so I have time blindness and therefore I can never show up on time. It's I don't know if that's exactly how this is supposed to work, but one of my favorite comedians on Instagram would say, as they say in LA, but I really love that journey for you. I still need you to interact with you, and the fact that you're never on time is that how you're going to live from here on out, and is our friendship going to work?
Yeah, as if it's impossible to change that. Mm-hmm. It's a factual thing that because of this diagnosis that I have attributed to me, and because of my misunderstanding of that diagnosis, I am now telling you that I don't have to regard your feelings.
Right.
So, yeah. Now, might some people who are neurodivergent have a harder time being on time? Sure. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. And at the very least, you could say, I'm so sorry that I'm late. I really tried. And because of my neurodivergence, it gets in the way, but I'm sorry. It's a different statement than deal with it, honey.
Right. But I think it's great for people that I know who've always felt so different. The way that social media puts thousands of people in front of you who look just like you and act just like you.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's been very confirming for a lot of people. Can you diagnose somebody from watching can you diagnose yourself from watching a 3? I mean, it's how long do you get? A minute? 15 seconds?
It used to be a minute, but I think they extended it on TikTok, but I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of things one could say, but briefly, just sort of piggybacking on what Rebecca is saying, it's both good and bad. On the good side, it's exposing a lot of people to ideas that they never would have been exposed to before. It's liberating a lot of people. It's getting them the ball rolling with them going to therapy. We've seen a huge uptick in demand for therapy.
And acceptance of therapy.
Mm-hmm. And presumably there's a lot of people who are misdiagnosing themselves on TikTok, but they go to a therapist, and then there's a good assessment that takes place and conversations along those lines in the therapy office. The bad side is that there's a lot of people who are misdiagnosing themselves and others, going down roads that are not good for them, are harming them and harming other people, and using diagnoses as a judgment, right? Oh, that person's borderline, or they're bipolar, and misuse of term and demeaning people oh my God, I'm so ADHD, or I'm so OCD, or that's gaslighting me, when it's not used appropriately, and people who are actually suffering from those disorders or have been abused through gaslighting are wow, I can't believe that you're just taking my whole history and my struggle and reducing it to, if you suffer from legit OCD and someone says, oh my God, I'm so OCD, I really want my pencils to be lined up sometimes. It's completely demeaning. It'd be like someone saying, oh my God, my stomach hurts. I have cancer. I'm going to die. And then that's just the way people talk. It's well, do you know how hurtful that is to people who actually have cancer? You're just playing around with the pain of millions and millions of people and
I always try to describe to people to really understand what might impact you a minute out of the day impacts someone else every minute of every day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to understand that if you're not actually seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I feel like as professionals, we understand differently. It's what it looks like if it's truly lessening your ability to enjoy life,
Mm-hmm.
which is different than I have this little thing that's kind of annoying that I do.
Yeah, quirky. But there's probably a lot of people in the middle of the good and the bad, where there are lots of people, and I imagine this, my impression is that 99% of what's on TikTok regarding psychology is false or wrong-headed or weird or bad or not based on evidence or something, misguided, misinformation. Like, I did a series of reacting to TikTok videos, and I just typed in psychology in the search bar in TikTok. And I don't know if there was one thing that I saw that wasn't just completely laughable. You know, the algorithm, it encourage, even if it's stupid, it gets preferred by the algorithm because it's causing a reaction. People are commenting or whatever. And so these social media platforms, they encourage misinformation. But I imagine there's a lot of people in this middle zone where they're being absolutely misinformed and miseducated and misguided. And there isn't necessarily a negative consequence to it. They're just oblivious to the language and the concepts within our field, which doesn't feel great to me. But I'd almost rather take it, because in the past, people would say, wasn't therapy for like crazy people? Mm-hmm. So I'd rather take this.
Wait, we've swung really far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like, be careful what you ask for, because, we've been advocating for mental health awareness, mental health awareness, and also therapy destigmatization for decades. It's happening, and this is a consequence that I don't think any of us really predicted.
I know, we could have never imagined. And we could have never imagined the amount. So there's a great documentary, I think it's on Amazon, could be on Netflix, called Andy Warhol's Diaries. It's 4-parters. I after the first one, I needed like a 3-week break. But it talks about how Andy Warhol predicted this universe where everybody could be famous. And, there's some interesting things that occur when everybody can be famous, and that everybody's opinion suddenly has equal weight, and there's not a lot of curiosity about, being a professional has no weight anymore. And yet I find it really interesting when people come to me and they say, this is what I've heard. And I'm like, oh, that's not quite right. Like someone asked me, the myth in their family is that alcoholism skipped a generation because it happened in their family that it had skipped a generation. And we had a really interesting conversation about that. Like, that is a myth that your family told you, right? Like, all you have is the evidence in front of you. And so you make a story up about it. But like in my field, does alcoholism skip a generation? No. Like, alcoholism happens in every generation. But their family was this anomaly, and so that they had decided that that was true.
Right.
And so, these things get really interesting. And then that's the family's whole story, right? Like, oh God, should I have children? Alcohol skipped my generation, but is my child going to be an alcoholic? And I was like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting how these things show up for people.
And that happened before social media.
Right.
It's just now out and about, and we see all of it.
You see it at 1 a.m. when your brain is like, oh, like I'm awake, and that must be true, and now I'll stay awake till 3 a.m. thinking about this.
Yeah.
As opposed to like you used to not. So one of my favorite drag queens, Bob the Drag Queen, has this hysterical routine about what it used to be like to try and watch porn on the family computer, and like to sneak out and turn on AOL in the middle of the night and beep boop, beep boop, boop, have all these like loud noises happen, and how his little niece will never know the experience of like having to learn information in public, right? Like, now we can all like access anything at any time, and our brains are not set up for it.
Yeah. Well, let's adjourn there. And
I'll see you more often than I've seen you lately.
Yeah, we'll have to do this maybe at an increased pace to make up for the past few months.
This lackadaisical summer that you were horribly ill. I got horribly busy.
Yeah.
We got old.
Yeah. It's a thing. So if you want to write into Rebecca,
Please.
say, hi, Rebecca, or Rebecca-sode or something.
And we are still trying to build my Instagram following. I'm still trying to get to, is it 1,200 or 1,400? I'm still trying to get...
Something like that.
Yeah.
R-Text,
R-Text.
R-T-E-X-T on Instagram.
And the Tarot Deck Therapist Who Tarot on Etsy. If you're looking to get into tarot, people are loving it.
Mm-hmm. So they can find it. What's the title?
Therapist Who Tarot Deck. It's on Etsy. Selling like hotcakes. I've sent 2 to Australia, Singapore, Canada,
Cool.
Venezuela, an army base somewhere in Europe that I'm not allowed to know where she is.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us. And thanks for joining me, Rebecca. And everyone, please take care of yourself because...
Please take care of yourself. The holidays are coming, so we want you to really take care of yourself through that time.